Hey there folks, and welcome to this video. And here I'm going to be talking about Mercedes. I'm going to be talking about Mercedes-Benz, I'm going to be talking about virtue signalling, and I'm also going to be doing a bit of an aside to talk about the history of Germany. Now, many might remember the start of the F1 season around the Austrian Grand Prix, and Mercedes unveiling a new livery as part of its renewed purpose to pledge to end racism, but also to pledge to increase diversity in their workforce. They pointed out that 3% of their workforce identified with Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic groups, and 12% identified as women. However, some were keen to criticise Mercedes, in particular pointing out Mercedes' history, specifically during the time before and during the Second World War. This video will look at Mercedes as a team and as a company. It will look at the concept of virtue signalling, and it will look at the state of Germany before, during, and after the Second World War, with World War II being kind of the key period of focus. However, I won't be naming the party that was in power, and the same will go if I'm talking about Italy at all during any asides. Reason being is YouTube gets kind of funny and decides to censor these videos if they do mention that party. So instead I'll be describing them either ideologically or as the government in those periods. Let's start off by talking about before World War II. Now, Mercedes-Benz traces its roots back to 1883, with Carl Benz and his 1885 patent Motorwagen. In 1926 it merged with Daimler to become the two entities of Mercedes-Benz and Daimler-Benz, the companies we recognise today. However, neither Daimler nor Benz themselves actually lived to World War II. Though they had cooperated beforehand, Daimler passed away in 1900 and Benz lived until 1929. Similarly, Maybach, whose namesake brand is also owned by Daimler Auto Group, passed away in 1929, however in December, while Carl Benz passed away in April. Since 1894, these companies in some way or another had competed in motorsport. From 1923, it had established a presence in motorsport unlike other brands in Germany, such as later on the Auto Union. However, it's a period from 1933 that draws the most attention, and for multiple reasons. The first is the branding of the silver arrows, which in that period would be attributed to both the Merc and Auto Union cars. It was close to, at the same time, white, which was the national German colour. But it also was in tandem with Mercedes' involvement with the government at the time. A large part of the motorsports program was attached to the state for propaganda and technological reasons. The same thing went for Auto Union. They were in a bit of a rivalry. In fact, Channel 4 has just released a show called Hitler Supercars, which covers this particular topic and looks at Mercedes and Auto Union, and also people such as Ferdinand Porsche. This included taking part in atrocities, though, so they would use such acts as forced labourers, estimated to be as high in some estimates as 46,000 people in 1944. The company would build many vehicles for the government and during the war the German army. This would include trucks and other forms of transport. Daimler say, and you can see this in the sources as well as a couple of other bits you can read, that the use of forced labour was to bolster their roster. So it would make up roughly around half of what their workforce was, but this was on top of them already having brought in all kinds of people that weren't currently part of the war effort to work in their factories. That included women, for example. However, there was also a difference between how different groups were treated. So forced labourers from Western Europe would receive far more favourable treatment in things such as housing than those from Eastern Europe, people who were prisoners of war, and of course those from the horrible, horrible concentration camps. Luckily, 1945 brought the end to the Second World War, and it brought the end to all of these atrocities. Germany reformed into states such as East and West, but there was always the idea of war guilt, taking responsibility for the war and actions of the German state. West Germany had the Grundgesetz, which aimed to prevent the horrors of the 30s and 40s state to return. This included making a constitution that was really hard, almost impossible in some circumstances, to be able to overturn. But of course, a lot of this old regime would still work within the new state, or within any kind of allied state. They would work within the government in industries, but they would also work in other countries, such as the United States. Of course, there was backlash to this, with groups such as the Red Army faction committing acts of terror against these agents. Mercedes, they'd move on and try and make some amends. Later on, they would pay out reparations to people affected, and they'd also maintain some kind of brand awareness and recognition. While some vehicles, such as the 600, were used by questionable figures and dictators like Deng Xiaoping, Idi Amin, Hosni Mubarak, Robert Mugabe, Joseph Tito, Saddam Hussein, Kim Il-sung, and by extension Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, Pablo Escobar, and of course Jeremy Clarkson, Mercedes did still keep a brand awareness. They maintained a reputation not only for engineering, but gained one for safety with innovations like 3-point seatbelts, airbags, ABS, ESP, and more. But how do we get from there to talk about virtue signalling? Brand awareness isn't something unique to Mercedes-Benz. Many brands will often use campaigns and movements to create brand recognition as some kind of progressive entity. If you'd like to watch more, H-Bomber Guy has a brilliant video on woke brands. It's a good place to go to. But in regards to the current Black Lives Matter movement going on around the world, it's about a year old, so it doesn't really talk about that. So how can we say this video and the lessons from it relate to the automotive industry and today? Well, some brands have recognised the Black Lives Matter movement and other equality movements like Pride in the past. Even ones with dubious past political records like Ford, where these actions are actually linked to the founding persons themselves. Note that I made a distinction that the founding members like Benz and Daimler and Maybach were dead before the German regime of the 30s and 40s took power. Henry Ford did horrible things whilst he was still alive. But is it necessarily a bad thing that brands and companies and corporations will be speaking up about these issues? Well, it really depends on how it's done. Pepsi and Kendall Jenner, for example, that was bad. That was really bad. But Ford, General Motors, BMW, Infiniti, Lexus, as well as the parent company Toyota, all made pro-BLM statements in addition to Mercedes-Benz. And in addition to this, the gesture made by the F1 team exists largely outside of Mercedes as a corporate entity. It's more to do with the team and the team's brand. But is it a bad thing? Having corporations on side can help a movement's momentum. It's partially because these corporations judge it not a risky cause to support, but that in turn it will also make these a less controversial cause to support. Because they're looking at it for a profit kind of standpoint. They're not looking at it necessarily out of the thing of, oh, this is a good thing to do. It's looking at it with a kind of, this is a good thing to do for us. Whilst most of these are gestures, and we do have to accept they are gestures, they do gesture towards something bigger. And provided these entities are held to account, it can lead to a change in a nation. It can lead to change in legislature, in legislators, and it can actually lead to a common good. We don't have to praise a corporation for doing this. They're only really doing it because, well, profit. But the fact that they see it as profitable is a good thing. And that's where we get to with this. I have done so many videos recently talking about political movements, talking about Black Lives Matter, talking about Formula 1, and talking about how they all kind of intertwine, with drivers taking the knee and Charles Leclerc saying, I believe proper actions instead of gestures make it, and that kind of... This video is designed to be a kind of counter to that belief, to say that actually these gestures do mean a lot. Even if it is largely symbolic, it can lead to greater change. Yeah, that was the main point to making a video like this. I've put some of my sources in the description section down below for you to check out. And I honestly urge you to. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope you'll stick around.